Simcha sefat chayam, yachad kulam odu v'chim lechu v'yamru, Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed. So Yisrael, kum avi'ezad Yisrael, u'v'dechenu mecha Yehuda v'Yisrael. Go aleinu Adonai tzavaot shemo kedosh Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai, Ga Yisrael. The preliminary service. And I switched into a gear that I didn't even remember that I had, and just kept on rocking and rolling. Rabbi Barnett is here to lead the Shacharit service, not me. So Rabbi, if you desire, the bima is yours. I really was. It's like you drive home from work, you know you have to stop at Publix, and you're in your driveway before you realize you didn't stop at Publix. I was optimistic it was. Well, anyway, when the rabbi steps up to the bima, we will be reciting the Shacharitim for Shabbat, which can be found on page 255 in your Siddur. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you so much, Mark. You did really a great job. No, it was just wonderful. You really did the heavy lifting for our Shacharit. I'm going to continue with the Hechi Kedusha form. That is then continuing on page 255. Page 255. Baruch atah Adonai
Melech Yoram v'Nisa Adon Olamim. I'm going to ask Tom Mayer if he will go and to the ark. And we rise. Our ark is presently outside of camera range. So we rise for Vayhi bin Soah while the ark is still opened. Vayhi bin Soah ha'aron Vayomer Moshe Kuma Adonai V'yafutzu oyevecha V'yanusu misanecha mipanecha Ki mitzion tetzei Torah Ki mitzion tetzei Torah U'devar Adonai mi'Yerushalayim Baruch shenatan Torah Baruch shenatan Torah Li'amo Yisrael b'kedushato. Turning to page 316. Bebe anarachet v'lishme kadisha yakira ana emartush bechon yehera bakadamach tetiftach libi b'yoraita v'tashlim mishalim delibi v'libadech alamach Yisrael l'tavo l'chaim v'lishlam. Amen. Dan Williams, if you will go bring the Torah forward, please pick the one in the ark that is closest to the front of the Torah. As we remain standing, and I'm sure the rabbi would have told you that what we just chanted wasn't Hebrew, but Aramaic. So now you're all fluent in Aramaic. Respecting social distancing, I put my mask on. We turn to page, wherever we are, I accidentally lost it, page 320 for Shema Gadlu. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Adonenu kadosh shmo. Gadlu l'Adonai tiyonu romema shemo yachdav. Lecha Adonai agedula ve'agevura ve'atiferet ve'anetzach ve'ahod ki kol b'shamayim u'ba'aretz ki kol b'shamayim u'ba'aretz. Lecha Adonai amram lacha le'yamin ha'aseh lecha l'rosh. Romemu, Romemu, Adonai Eloheinu, V'istagavu, V'istagavu, Le'adam raglav kadoshu. Romemu, Romemu, Adonai Eloheinu, V'istagavu, V'istagavu, Le'ar kahadsho. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu. While the Torah is placed on the shulchan, you may be seated. No, not this one. This is the one closest to Devarim. That's okay. Why don't you get the other one? We'll just leave this one here. Rabbi, this would be a very appropriate time to say something.
So, in this week's Torah portion, it's called Vayera. And some of you may recognize or remember the title of this one from a recent previous holiday that we had, Rosh Hashanah. And it's in this portion that we have the story of the binding of Isaac. And before that, the rivalry a little bit between the two brothers. And so there are many motifs that come to mind. I spoke on last night. If anyone, just by point of reference, would like to learn a little bit more of what we talked about, you can reference last night's service. And I talked about the different models of basically different ways of looking at not just Abraham, which we focused on for Rosh Hashanah, but Isaac in particular, and the two models in particular, one of innocence and then one of knowing awareness that he was about to be sacrificed and everything that is involved within the concept of martyrdom in that sense. And I spoke about that at some length last night, so rather than recapitulate that here now, I will simply refer you to last night's recording, which I understand was actually placed and made its way to the internet. That having been said, this is quite a big Torah scroll here. Wow. Is this the one you usually use on Shabbat? This is the big one. Okay, I'll lift this up for you. Great. Okay, I'm going to turn the Torah scroll, and it's searching here, over to Mark at this time. So this is still Noah.
Yes. Perfect. Right here. Perfect. recite the blessing from your seat. We are still desirous of creating some type of social distancing and avoiding being a COVID hotspot. Although Seminole County, I think, is down below 5%. Yay! For the first Aliyah, we will call Morris Rashi to the Torah. Actually, I'm going to invite Morris to the Torah, directly to the Torah. Moshe ben Shlomo. Baruch Shanatan Torah Yom Yisrael B'Yitzosho V'Yatem Hadvikim Baranai Elohechem Chaim Kolchem Hayom. It's only 4 psukim, which is the first Aliyah. You want to chant it, or do you want to just point and shoot?
I'll try chanting it if I blow it. You can say
Okay, good enough.
Baruch Adonai Hamorach.
Baruch Adonai Hamorach Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamorach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Adonai Mechalam. Asher Baruch Abanu Mikol Ha'amim. V'natan Lanu V'Torato. Baruch Adonai. Noten HaTorah. V'apakat et Sodah. Kasher Mahad. V'ya'as Adonai L'Sodah. Kasher Diber. V'tahed V'toled. Sada Abraham ben Nizkenav, Lemod Asher Devar Eto Elohim, Vayikra Abraham et Shem Beno Hanolad Lo Asher Yolado Lo Sarah Yitzchak, Vayimol Abraham et Yitzchak Beno ben Shmanat Yamim Asher Tzivot Elohim. Baruch Adonai Mechalam, Asher Natanu Torah Emet, V'chayir Lanu Tohed B'chayinu, Baruch Adonai, Noten HaTorah.
Amen. I am remiss if you are following in our Eitz Chaim Chumash. We are in the second part of the triennial cycle, and our Torah reading started with chapter 21, verse 1. And now we are on chapter 21, verse 5. And I call to the Torah to stand at his seat. Barry, will you please rise?
So page 113 page 100, yeah, Mark, please announce it for those
I have no idea where we are.
No, I'm telling you.
Oh.
Page 113.
Page 113 in our Eitz Chaim Chumash. That's okay, just point. I'll take it. I'm going to shorten it anyway. Baruch Adonai Hamorach Le'olam Va'ed. Shema. Amen. Amen. V'Avraham ben me'at shana. V'tivaled lo et Yitzchak beno. V'atomer Sarah. צחוק עשה לי אלוהים, כל השומע יצחק לי, ותאמר ממילא לאברהם, העניקה בנים שרה, כי ילדתי בן לזקוניו, ויגדל הילד ויגמל, ויעש אברהם, משתגדו ביום תגמל את יצחק ותרץ רע את בן חגר המזרית אשר ילדה לאברהם מצחק. Amen. Yamot Shlishi. We call Mark Lichtenstein to rise from his seat for the third Aliyah. Yeah.
Well,
Or the other Mark Lichtenstein, his evil twin, who is probably watching online. Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed. Shmuel. Amen. V'tomel Avraham Yaresh Hamazot v'et bena ki lo yirash ben Hamazot im beni im Yitzchak v'yera hadavar me'od b'nei Avraham al odot beno v'yomer Elohim el Avraham Eyere b'necha ahana ve'arhamatcha kol asher tamar elecha zara shama v'kola ki b'Yitzchak yikare lecha zara ve'gam et ben ha'amal legoy asimenu Ki zaracha hu. Amen. Yamod Revi'i. For the fourth Aliyah, we ask Kameir to stand. We are verse 14. Baruch Hu Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed. Shema. Amen. Vayishkem Avraham baboker vayikach lechem hachamat mayim vayiten et hagasam al shikma v'yedayeled vayishlachecha vateled vatechta במדבר באר שווה, ויקלו המים מן החמת, ותשלך את הילד תחת אחד השיחי, ותלך, ותשב לה מנגד, הרחק כמתחה וקשת, כי אמרה אל ערב במות הילד, ותשב מנגד, ותישא את קולו ותך, וישמע אלוהים אל כל הנהר, ויקרא מלאך אלוהים את הגר מן השמיים, ויאמר למלאך הגר, אל תיראי כי שמע אלוהים אל כל הנהר באשר הוא שם. What Aliyah are we up to? Yeah, I know. We the Chamishi? Yeah, 5. Amen. Yamod Chamishi. My number is correct. Standing for the fifth Aliyah is Jeff Golub. Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed. Night 18. Kumi. Si et hana'ar החזיקי את ידך פה, כי לגוי גדול אשימנו, ויקח אלוהים את העינך, ותרא באר מים, ותלך, ותמלא את החמד מים, ותשק Et hanar vayhi Elohim, et hanar vayigdal, vayeshev bamidbar, vayirove kashat, vayeshev bamidbar paran, vatikach li imo, isha me'eretz Mitzrayim. Shmo. Amen. Yamot Shishi. For the sixth Aliyah we call Toby and Ann to stand. Verse 22, chapter 21, verse 22. What a team. You want to do it? I'll let you go as far as you want to go. Just keep going. I'll stop you after about 4 psukim. Shema. Amen.
ויבעטהו ויאמר אבימלך ופיחת שק צבאו אל אברהם לאמור אלוהים עמך בכל אשר אתה עושה ואתה תשבע לי אל האלוהים הנה אם תשקר לי ולניני לקחתי לחסד אשר עשיתי עמך תעשה עמדי ועם הארץ אשר גרת בה ויאמר אברהם אנוכי אשבע לוחץ אברהם את אבימלך על עדות באר המים אשר גזלו אבימלך.
Now we have 7. I think we have 7. Amen. Yamot Shvi. For the 7th and final Aliyah, we call Rabbi Barnett to stand at his seat. Not his feet, his seat. Baruch Adonai Havarach Le'olam Va'ed. Shmo. Amen. Vayomer Avimelech lo yadati mi asa et הדבר הזה וגם אתה לא הגדת לי וגם אנוכי לא שמעתי בלתי היום ויקח אברהם צאן ובקר וייתן לאבימלך ויקחו שניהם ברית ויצב אברהם את שבע בשעות הצאן לבדיהן ויאמר אבימלך אל אברהם מה הן השבע כבשות האלה אשר הצבת לבדנה. Amen. Do you want a brief Haftarah, or do you want to explain the Haftarah?
I couldn't understand your question.
Well, we're at the Haftarah later.
Yes, I was planning to read a section of the Haftarah,
Okay.
and then I'm going to speak on it later.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Before going to Maftir, do you want to do a Misha Berach before Maftir, or just finish the
I think
Torah?
that'd be a good idea. Why don't you do that's from the list up there?
Would you hand me the cover of the Torah, please? I think it's right here. That's probably all. Yasher Koach. Before concluding the Torah reading, we will recite a Misha Berach for those who are ill, at home, or in the hospital. You can find the Misha Berach prayer on the inside back cover of your Siddur. In between the first and second paragraphs, I will, of course, give those names of those people on the congregation's Mishaberach list, and we will give a moment to those in the congregation to recite the names on their personal Mishaberach list. And you are welcome to recite out loud names on your own personal Mishaberach list at home. Mishaberach avotenu, Mekor habracha limotenu. May the source of strength who bless the ones before us help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. On the Beth Am Mishaberach list are Steve Ashheim, Mona Backhove, Henry Birch, Teresa Kala, Amelia Cooley, Audrey Dash, Bruce Dash, Patrick Dreiling, Gordon Feinberg, Donald Ingram, Alan Jacobs, Rita Kindell, Norman Levin, Steve Lifshin, Sandy Minkin, Dom Salfi, Loretta Scher, Harleen Shriek, Leslie Schulsinger, Izzy Sigmund, Saul Stein, Bill Thompson, Peter Teitelbaum, Nancy Town, Herb Weissman, Katerina Williams, Labelman Margalit, Liba Shlomi Turacha Bat Margalit, Feivel Shlomo ben Dvorah Yisrael, Ben Ethel Avraham, Ben Masha. If you have a name you'd like to recite, please stand at your seat and you will be called. Tuvia. Jeff. Morris. Oh, Harleen Schreck. I apologize. Rabbi? I'll give you a moment to recite your own names on your personal name Shabbat list. And we conclude. Mishaberach imotenu, Mekor habracha lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen. And Morris, I lied. We are not done. Morris said, we are not done, or you are not done. Well, that depends, because we've come to the Haftarah. And Rabbi, you will be chanting part of the Haftarah? I shall chant them. Okay, then I will ask Greg Allman to stand in his seat. And Morris, if you would. Where is the Haftarah? It is the final aliyah in the Parsha, chapter 22, verse 21. I don't have my Chumash in front of me. 121, verse 20? Vayihi acharei levarim ha'ela? Okay. Greg. Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed. Shema. Amen. Vayi acharei advarim ha'ele vayigal le'Avraham lemor hinei adam milka gami banim l'chol achicha et ut bechoro v'et buz achi v'et Kemuel v'Yaram v'et chesed v'et chazo v'et pildash v'et yidlaf v'et Betuel u'Betuel yaladet Rivka shmona ele yada milka l'chol achi Avraham וילגשו שמה ראומה ותלד גם היא את אבק ואת גחן ואת תחש ואת מחכה Shema. Amen. Before calling someone to carry the Torah, I will take a personal moment here. The rabbi said Yasher Koach after that. This parsha should be quite familiar to those of you who came to High Holiday services. That last Aliyah, if I embarrass my son, I apologize. When we were looking for a name for my eldest son, I was fascinated by the name Yidlaf, which is here in this parsha. And I've been reading this Aliyah on Yontif for many, many years using Torah Trope. And we joked about it because Yidlaf, I thought, was a really pretty Hebrew name. But if you look at the English spelling of it in your Chumash, it's Jidlaph. And I said, I could see the first day of school every year for this child. The teacher would be going down the list of names, calling attendance, and she would go, Sarah Abels, here, good. Betty Cass, okay, here. Jidlap Davids. And this little child would have to raise his hand and go, no, ma'am, it's Yidlaf. Okay, Jidlap. And that has been a running gag for 32 years. So if it sounds like I'm really familiar with this one particular Aliyah, that's why. That being said, we are going to tie and dress the Torah, and I invite anybody who wants to risk coming close to the bima to step forward. I'll call on Dan and Mark here to dress, to cover the Torah, and we'll put the Torah. We will leave the Torah out until after the Haftarah is read, and then we will put the Torah away. Mark, if you'll help Dan. No, we're just gonna dress it. Mark. Bezot Torah, Asher Shel Moshe, Ibn Israel, Abi Adonai Ad Rabbi, we're going to leave the Torah here. Okay, onto the side. The side there where you are. Oh, okay. And you're standing, you may be seated.
Yasher Koach to all of those who participated in the Torah service. Yasher Koach to, in particular, to our Torah readers, Mark Davids and Moshe Rashi. Thank you so much. Yasher Koach to both of you, and to everyone else who participated here. The Haftarah today will be found on page 124 in your Eitz Chaim, page 124. I'm going to be speaking about some of the motifs in this Haftarah, which actually, the entire Haftarah is a long one. It's really broken into two separate stories, and both of them concern miracles that were performed by the prophet Elisha. And as you know, the prophet Elisha was the disciple of Elijah. And just as the prophet Elijah in one case saved a man's life, and it was talked about, I think, even on one of the Haftarot for holidays. He performed a miracle of saving a young man's life through the process of what we would now call mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. And his disciple, Elisha, in the second story of the Haftarah, does a similar thing with a woman from Shunem, a wealthy woman, who provided food and lodging for him because she knew he was a man of God and wanted him to be able to have his physical comforts taken care of. And as a result, when he would come by, he would visit them and stay in this chamber. And as a result of the hospitality that she offered him, what he did was he offered her a special gift, something that she was not able to do on her own, that came through divine intervention and divine beneficence. The one thing that she was lacking, she had wealth, but she didn't have a son. And so she wanted to have a son, and the prophet Elisha said that next year when I come by at this time, in this season, you will in fact be embracing a son. And when I talk about the Haftarah in greater length, I'll go into the second part of that story. But that's the second story. The first story also involves the motif of hospitality, except almost in reverse. There was a woman, a wife of one of the disciples of the prophets, who cried out to Elisha. She said, "My husband is dead. I have no means of surviving here, and the creditor is coming to seize our 2 children." So she didn't even have the wherewithal to offer the prophet food and material assistance. So, of course, Elisha decides and ascertains what's necessary, and he provides that material base for her through essentially a miracle. Now, both of these stories involve miracles, right? The resuscitation from a situation of death or near death. The woman thought that, the Shunammite woman thought that her son, well, I had sort of jumped ahead, but one day he was in the field and he passed out. And he said, my head. And then he passed out and she thought he was dead. So she called the prophet to come and help. But in this particular case, in the first one, the miracle was that the prophet Elisha told her to bring different vessels, and he asked what she had, and she had only one vessel of oil. And this evidently was a true miracle, because he told her to go out and borrow all kinds of empty vessels from your neighbors, which she did, and he instructed her and her children to go inside the room that they lived in, shut the door behind them, and start pouring, and pour from the one full vessel into the empty ones, and continue pouring until there was nothing left. And she did that, and indeed, from this, there's no rational explanation for this one, how it seems, how this trick was done. But in point of fact, all of the vessels got filled, and then towards the end of this part of the first part of the Haftarah, he tells her then to go out and sell the oil, because you remember, oil was like currency in the Middle East in those days. They didn't have coins and money in the same way. They may have some coins, but also they bartered a lot. They used barter. It was an agricultural society. And oil was a commodity. And it was a tradable commodity. It could be stored in vessels, and it had value. And it had an inherent value because it was used for survival, for cooking, and for maybe even they made salad dressings. But for many purposes, they used the oil there. So it was a tradable commodity. As such, she could sell it and then have the wherewithal to have the assets to pay back the creditor, not only for her own debts, for those of her children, and to rescue her children. So these are beautiful stories about the prophet Elisha. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the first section here, which starts at chapter 4, verse 1 on page 124, and then continues through the conclusion of this part of the story, where he tells her to go sell the oil and pay your debt, and you and your children can live on the rest. And there would be money left over for them to survive, like a residual kind of income left over from that. So that will conclude on verse 7 of page 124. So I'll begin with the blessing first, and like I said, then later on I will speak a little bit more in length about these miracles, having now already introduced them. Page 326 with a blessing before the Haftarah.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'nviim tovim v'rtzav divreihem hanemarim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'Torah u'v'Moshe avto u'v'Yisrael amo u'v'nviei ha'emet v'tzedek.
Page 124 then, chapter 4, verse 1.
Misha echat minishe b'nei hanviim tzaka el Elisha lemor avdecha ishi met ve'ata yadata ki avdecha haya yireh et Adonai והנושא בא לקחת את שני ילדיי לו לעבדים. ויאמר אליה אלישע מה אעשה לך, הגיד לי מה יש לך בבית, ותאמר אין לשפחתך הכל בבית, כי אם אסוך שמן. ויאמר לכי שאלי לך כלים מן החוץ מאת כל שכנייך, כלים ריקים אל תמעיטי. ובאת וסגרת הדלת בידך וביד בנייך, ויצקת על כל הכלים האלה והמלא תעשי. ותלך מאיתו ותסגור הדלת בידה וביד בניה, הם מגישים עליה והיא מוצקת. ויהי כמלאות הכלים, ותאמר אל בנה הגישה אלה עוד כלים, ויאמר אליה אין עוד כלי, ויעמוד השמן. ותבוא ותגד לאיש אלוהים, ויאמר לכי מכרי את השמן ושלמי את נשייך, את נשייך, ואת ובנייך תחי בנותר.
And we continue now with the blessing after the Haftarah, page 326.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, צור כל העולמים, צדיק בכל הדורות, האל הנאמן האומר ועושה, המדבר ומקיים, שכל דבריו אמת וצדק. נאמן אתה הוא אדוני אלוהינו, ונאמנים דבריך, ודבר אחד מדבריך אחור לא ישוב ריקם, כי אל מלך נאמן ורחמן אתה, ברוך אתה אדוני האל הנאמן בכל דבריו, רחם
על ציון כי בית חיינו, ועלובת נפש תושיע במרב ימינו. ברוך אתה אדוני, משמח ציון בבניה. שמחנו אדוני אלוהינו, באליהו הנביא עבדך, ובמלכות בית דוד משיחך, במהרה יבוא ויגל ליבנו. על כיסו לא ישב זר, ולא יחלו עוד אחרים את כבודו, כי בשם קודשך נשבעת לו, שלא יכבה נרו לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני מגן דוד. על התורה ועל העבודה ועל הלווים ועל יום השבת הזה שנתת לנו אדוני אלוהינו, לקדושה ולמנוחה, לכבוד ולתפארת. על הכל אדוני אלוהינו אנחנו מודים לך ומברכים אותך. יתברך שמך בפי כל חי תמיד לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת. Amen. So since we have the Haftarah, before you put them away, please don't collect them yet. Before you put them away, let's keep your Haftarah and your Humashim open here to this little story on these set of stories, page 124 and 125, where we have these two tales of Elisha the prophet. And they're both very dramatic in their individual ways. And as the rabbis have pointed out, there are indeed threads of connection between both of them. So as I mentioned earlier, there's a motif of food that connects these two stories. In the first case, the woman did not have food to offer the prophet. And yet because of that, she was awarded with food, i.e. wherewithal, the vessels of oil that she was able to sell, and then buy food, and buy survive, and buy that sale, be able to survive with her and her children. And the other is the notion of hospitality. And indeed, this idea of, in both cases, these people welcomed the prophets here, and certainly in the case of the case of Elisha visiting this wealthy woman from Shunem, and so she made a place for him to stay, a little separate room, a bed, a desk. In our day, we put lamps there and things like that. They probably had a candle, and fed him, and as a result, he gave her what she didn't have, and that was a child. So these stories are related by motifs of both food and children. As we said in the first case, the children were about to be taken away. They were going to be sold into slavery. A horrible fate, especially under the conditions in which they would have been working as slaves in those eras and times. And so united by food, these stories here, by the thread of that connection, and then children. Now, in the case of the second story, so the prophet Elisha promised the wealthy lady from Shunem that she would have a son and bear a son. And indeed she did. And then, she was of course thrilled for that. She raised him. And then he was working in the fields one day with the reapers and probably had what we would call, most likely today, a stroke. He probably had some type of aneurysm or stroke in his head. He said, "Oh, my head." And the father ordered a servant to carry him to the mother. She took him up. She brought him, she held him on her lap until noon, and then evidently she experienced that he died. Now, in our modern perspective, we would say, well, maybe he didn't actually die, maybe he completely just lost consciousness and his pulse went to almost to zero. Or who knows, maybe he actually did clinically die. And through the artificial resuscitation, which the prophet Elisha did, he was revived. It's happened in hospital situations before where people have been clinically dead. And in point of fact, they've been able to be revived. So we don't know the exact, but either way, both of these situations were miracles. Now, so in the story of the lady from Shunem, she went back and she traveled all the way back to the prophet and went and fell at his feet and grabbed his legs, and the protector, the bodyguard, in essence, for the prophet, Gehazi, was about ready to, to have her forcibly removed. He said, "No, something's really wrong here. Her spirit is troubled in a way that I have not been able to discern," because prophets are supposed to be able to discern those things, but he hadn't. And she set up this look. Reminded him, "When you told me that a child would be coming, did I not tell you? Please don't deceive me. It's inconceivable that I could have a child at this stage of my life. I never expected it. And it's really highly unlikely, but please don't deceive me. Don't be don't give me something and then take it away. Don't be that kind of giver. Don't be someone who's going to take something and then I experience it as a theft." And so she reminds him in his presence as she's weeping and at his feet, "Didn't I ever tell you, please don't do this to me? And look what's happened. Now my son has died. I feel like I've been deserted by your cause." So he tells Gehazi, his servant, to go and put his staff on top of the boy, and it didn't work. He was not revived. Meanwhile, they had both traveled back to the location, so they were in place there. Gehazi goes into the room, and he does something that is also a motif that is of similarity between the two stories. He goes inside the room where the boy is lying down, and he shuts the door. It's very interesting. The rabbis point out that this is also a similarity of motif between the two stories. He shuts the door. Why would he shut the door? Because a miracle is about to happen. The boy is going to be revived. So he lays on top of him. They didn't have modern science to really go by like we have today, but they knew some things. And he laid on top of him. From his body, the boy's body began to get warmer. The circulation had stopped. The heart had probably stopped pumping. And so the boy's, if the heart was still pumping, it was probably extremely weak. The boy's flesh began to warm up. And that was a tremendous sign. But still, the boy was not completely revived. And the prophet did something very interesting as well. The beginning of the text, before he does this, before he lays on the boy, he prays to God. Now here's the prophet himself, the doer of miracles. But he's an agent. He realizes he's the agent of God. And it's through God's will and you could say manifestation here that we would have this miracle come to pass. And so he prays. And then he lays on the boy, feels the boy warming, and then he gets up and walks around and then goes back to the boy and puts his mouth on the boy's mouth, puts his hands on the boy's hands, mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, breathed into the boy, and the young man probably at that point, was revived. Now that was truly a miracle. When we hear of stories in modern hospital settings where people are revived from near-death experiences, we tend to do something that I would say is a sad point of our modern age. We tend to take those miracles, and they are miracles, whether or not they are brought about through the application of modern scientific principles as we now have come to understand them. Still, there's a miracle involved. It's not 100% certain that in those cases a person can be revived. And when they are, we take it for granted. We take it for granted. And that is in some ways perhaps an insult to God. Now, the first story where the lady poured the oil and instead of the volume only being sufficient for one container, it filled many containers. There's no easy modern scientific explanation for that. That was also a miracle. But you have to remember, from the biblical perspective, They didn't quite differentiate between one miracle and another on the basis of observable science as we experience it now, right? They were much more attuned because they did not have the technology of science. And the miracles that we take for granted coming from science, which no doubt in those days they would have absolutely called miracles. Let me just give you some examples, right? The telephone. Alexander Graham Bell. To be able to pick up a little piece of material, we call it sometimes plastic, now a cell phone, right? And before cell phones, let's talk about the older telephones that we grew up with. To pick up the landline, right? And have the sound go across wires to another part of the city, the country, indeed the world, international AT&T calling, right? Say hello to family and friends. Reach out. That was inconceivable. That would have been like a divine voice or message coming to them. Let's think of something totally out of their realm of experience as well. The notion of sending a human being to the moon, let alone flying from one place to another, but sending a human being to the moon, have a man on the moon? Incredible, unbelievable, unfathomable. And yet we have become jaded. We take those kinds of miracles for granted. They are miracles. We have a scientific now basis to understand and explain them. But the miraculous nature of those things, if you were to bring yourself back to the biblical mindset, it would be just as miraculous as the vessels of oil being filled. Better than a stage magician could seem to do in front of our eyes. And so one of the sadnesses, I think, of our modern period is that we've become somewhat jaded with miracles. We forget to notice the miraculous. Now, in our early morning psalms, there's no question that the rabbis instruct us, they teach us, they tell us with every psalm, with every blessing that we said, in essence, before the Shema this morning, the early morning part of the service, and then continuing through the Amidah itself, right? Blessings of praise, expressions of wonder, expressions of miracles. It's up to us to be more in tune with them. So as we encounter these two stories of miracles that happened in biblical times, I'm going to suggest that it befits us and it behooves us best not to dwell upon, well, could this really have scientifically happened, and how so, and is it a trick? Rather, to be open in our hearts to the mysteries of God, to divine blessing that can enter our lives, that has always been in our lives, and that can continue to permeate our lives with blessings. And in that sense, we will have extended and enduring meaning from miracles that you could say, some people could say, well, it happened 2,000 years ago. It doesn't matter. It doesn't affect us today. And I would say that would be the short-sighted view. The best view, I would suggest, is to look at these as expressions of ongoing miracles of God in our lives and ongoing ramifications and manifestations of God's presence in our lives that occurs every single day, at every single moment, as it's expressed in our prayers. If, and this is the big if and only, we are open enough to recognize them and to appreciate these miracles. Amen. And now I'm going to turn the service back over to Mark Davis here for the section of the service in which we return the Torah scrolls. Yes. Oh, we have a question. A question. Okay, let us have a question before, and I will, so that those who are viewing will be able to hear the question, I will repeat it. Yes. Okay. So let me I'm going to actually, I know the answer to the question, but what I want to do is actually turn to the same page and be on the same line as you. You're referring to the part that I chanted, correct? And what verse is it? The second verse, that's correct. Right, okay, very good. Yes. Sure, let me answer that question. So the question is, on page 124, in the text of Eitz Chaim, verse 2, the prophet is speaking to her, and I'm going to read the verse in English. Elisha said to her, "What can I do for you? Tell me, what have you in the house?" Okay, Higidili, tell me. Ma yesh, and then in small letters, we have the lamed, and then the chaf, and the yud. Ma yesh lechi babayit. And so that's written in small letters, but in larger letters, we have the standard lamed chaf, with a final chaf. So the question is, why do we have those small letters written there? And the answer is as follows. Sometimes in the transmission of texts, there's a scribal error. Sometimes there is an extra letter or an extra vowel put in, but particularly an extra letter that's put in. Now, the possessive form, the second person possessive form for what do you have is lach. What do you, ma yesh lach. But this got confused a little bit with putting a yud there and making it as if it would be basically to go, right? The verb, the command form, the imperative form, to go, lechi, as if you were commanding a woman to go somewhere. Like in the portion of the Torah where Abraham is told to go out of his native land, lech lecha. Well, if you were to say that to a woman, it would be lechi, but it would be lechi lach. So it got confused here. There was a text that had that incorrect grammatical stipulation, that grammatical formulation here in the context of this. And it doesn't make strict grammatical sense. So what they did is, in order to preserve and give honor to the scribes who wrote that in the textual methods of transmission, they preserved it, as it were, as a footnote in smaller print. But then in larger print, when they made this addition, they corrected the error, which is in essence a grammatical error, and put lach. So that's why those small letters are written there. And you'll find numerous examples of that in other places of both the Torah and the Haftarah. So this was an excellent question, Morris, and it gave an excellent opportunity for me to sort of engage in this teaching moment to make the distinction between to teach you and to share with you what the distinction between what the rabbis called the ketiv, coming from the word katav, meaning written, the ketiv form, and the kri, the form that you read out loud. So thank you so much for your question. That gave us an opportunity for a Torah lesson here as well. Now we'll go back to Mark.
We're on page 340 at the bottom of the page. Please rise. Barry, will you come forward? On your right shoulder? Just follow Dan in a moment. Hallelujah, Shem Adonai, ki niskav shemo levado, hodu al eret, v'shamayim, vayarem keheren li'amo, tilalecho chasidav, Livnei Yisrael am kerovo, Hallelujah, hallelujah. Mizmor leDavid. Chavul Adonai b'nelim. Chavul Adonai kavod va'oz. Chavul Adonai kevod shemo. Hishtachavul Adonai bechadrat kodesh. Kol Adonai al hamayim. El hakavod hirihim Adonai al mayim rabim. Kol Adonai ba'koach. Kol Adonai bechadar. Kol Adonai shover arazim. Vayishaber Adonai et arzei havanon. Vayarkidim kemo egel Levanon v'Sirion kemo ben Reimim. Kol Adonai chotzev lavodesh. Kol Adonai yachil midbar. Yachil Adonai midbar kadesh. Kol Adonai yechol el hayalot. Vayechesof yarot uvechalo kulo omer kavod. Adonai lamabul yashav. Vayeshev Adonai melech leolam. Adonai oz le'amo yitain. Adonai yevarech et amo b'shalom. On page 346, Uvenucha Yomar. Et Chaimi lamachazikim ba v'tom chera meusha derachea darchei noam v'chol netivotecha shalom hashivenu Adonai elecha v'nashuva kahadesh yamenu Kadesh Yamenu Kekedem. Amen. Sure. You're familiar with As a Driven Leaf, are you not? The book?
Yes, I've heard. Yes, I haven't. I never finished reading it. Yes. On page 354, I'll continue with the Chatzi Kaddish, going into the Musaf service, which will do the Heichi Kedusha form. Yitkadal v'yitkadash Shemei Rabbah, be'alma divrach kirutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chaye chodov yom echon, u'v'chaye dechol Beit Yisrael, ba'gala, u'v'zman kari v'imiru, Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabbah mevorach, לעולם ולעולם עולמיה יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתמה ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקדושה בריחו לילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן ועלמה וימירו Amen. We'll continue page 357. Kishim Adonai Akra Havu Kodal Eloheinu Adonai Svatai Tiftach Ufi Agid Tilatecha Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu V'Elohei Avoteinu Elohei Avraham Elohei Yitzchak V'Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel V'Elohei Leah האל הגדול הגיבור ונורא האל עליון גומר חסדים טובים וקונה הכל וזוכר חסדי אבות ומביא גואל לבני בניהם לבן שמו ביעבר מלך עוזר וקד ומושיע ומגן ברוך אתה אדוני מגן אברהם ועזרת שרה אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני מחיה מתים אתה רב יושיע משיב הרוח מוריד הגשם מכלכל חיים וחסד מחיי מתים ורחמים רבים סומך נופלים ורופא חולים ומתיר אסורים ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר מי כמוך בעל גבורות ומדומה לך מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמנת לחיות המתים. ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי המתים. נעריצך ונקדישך כסוד שיח שרפי קודש, המקדישים שמך בקודש, ככתוב על יד נביאך, וקרא זה אל זה ואמר, קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות, מלך כל הארץ כבודו. כבודו מלא עליהם כבודו מלא עולם, משרתיו שולים זה לזה, איה מקום כבודו, לעומתם ברוך יאמרו, ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו, ממקומו יבן ברק ממקומו יבן ברחמים, ויחונם המייחדים שמו ערב הבוקר בכל יום תמיד, פעמיים ביבוא שמו אומרים, שמע ישראל אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד הוא אלוהינו, הוא אבינו, הוא מלכנו, הוא מושיענו, והוא ישמיענו ברחמיו שנית, שנית לעיני כל החי, להיות לכם לאלוהים, אני אדוני אלוהיכם. ובדברי קודשך כתוב לאמור, ימלוך אדוני לעולם, אלוהי ציון לדור ודור, הללויה. לדור ודור נגיד גודלך, ולנצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש. ושבחך אלוהינו מפינו לימוש לעולם ועד, כי אל מלך גדול וקדוש אתה, ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש. We continue with the remainder of the Amidah then individually, continuing from page 360 through 370. To conclude the Amidah, we can sing Osei Shalom perhaps here. Osei Shalom bimromav, Uyasei Shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru, ve'imru, amen. Ya'aseh shalom, Ya'aseh shalom, Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Ya'aseh shalom, Ya'aseh shalom, Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. We'll continue then on page 372 with the Reader's Kaddish. Yitkada levi yitkadash shemei rabba ve'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayachon v'yamlichon v'chay v'chol beit Yisrael v'agalav izman kariv v'imru amen amen yehi shmei rabba mevorach le'olam olam me'ol maya yitbarach yitbarach v'yishtabach v'po'ar v'mayim v'nasei v'yitadar v'yit'alei v'yit'alal shmei lekudesha b'richu le'el min kol birchata v'shirata tushbachata v'nechamata Damiran ve'alma v'imru amen, amen. Titkaber slotchon devatachon decho Yisrael, kadam avon devishmaya v'imru amen, amen. Yehi shlam adavayin shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'imru amen, amen. Ose shalom v'imromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'imru amen, amen. And then this will lead us now to Ein Kelohenu, page 400. And the last couple times because of time, I think we skipped it. Let's go ahead and do it today. Page 400 with the traditional melody. Ein Kelohenu, Ein Kadonenu, Ein Kemalkeinu, Ein Kemoshienu, Michelohenu, Michadonenu, Micha Malkeinu, Micha Moshienu, Nodel Eloheinu, Nodel Adonenu, Nodel Malkeinu, Nodel Moshienu, Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Adonenu, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu, Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu, Atahu shiktiru avoteinu lefanecha et ketoret asamim. Please rise then for the Aleinu, page 402, as we face the eastern wall. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol latet gdula li'oser breshit shelo asanu k'geyei ha'aratzot velo samanu k'mishpachot ha'adama שלא שם חלקנו כהם וגורלנו ככל המונם ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסד הארץ ומשב קרוב השמיים ממעל ושכינתו זו בגבי מרומים הוא אלוהינו אין עוד אמת מלכנו אפס זולתו ככתוב בתורתו וידעת היום וישבות אל לבבך כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ממעל ועל הארץ מתחת אין עוד על כן גיבל לך אדוני ככתוב בתורתך אדוני מלך לעולם ועד ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד. And at this time then, we're going to invite everyone please to be seated. And I would like to mention the Yortzeiten that we have to commemorate on this Shabbat here. Julius Cohen, father of Louise Levy. Rosalind Davis, mother of Barbara Klein. Stephen Glass, cousin of Norman Levin. Frances Schatzberg, grandmother of Nancy Mendel. Stanley Wallman, father of Sherry Williams, for whom Dan is being the Kaddish here, I think, today, for saying Kaddish on Sherry's behalf, which is allowed. Janet Golden, sister also of Sherry Williams. So you're doing a double mitzvah. Arthur Appel, father of Howie Appel. And are there any other Yortzeiten that we should add from our congregation here today? Okay. Then, given that, we would like to invite those who are reciting Kaddish to turn to page 410, where we slow it down for the words of the mourner's Kaddish. Yit gadal v'yit kadash shemei rabba. Be'alma tivrach yirutei v'yamlich malchutei. B'chayechon uvyomechon uv'chayei dechol beit Yisrael. Ba'agala uvizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehi shmei rabba mevorach le'olam u'lemei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpo'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shemei dekudesha brichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechemata. Da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shlamar rabba min shemaya. V'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom v'imromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. May God grant comfort to all of us who mourn, and may the memory of those for whom we mourn remain among us as a loving, living, and inspiring benediction. And we can say, Amen. Please be seated. At this time, I just want to give a short pitch for my upcoming Hebrew class, and then I'm going to let Dan talk about the event that we're also scheduling here for November 7th, which hopefully we want to invite, and we hope the entire congregation will show up for. Concerning my class, a notice went out, I believe yesterday in the email, notifying people of the fact that our Hebrew class will be beginning. The first class evening is scheduled for November 10th, which is on a Wednesday. I'm doing on Wednesdays to accommodate schedules of those who have conflicts on Tuesday evenings. And registration, we are taking for this. I need to know how many copies to have prepared. And so registration needs to be done by November 3rd, please. November 3rd. So a week before, by that day, please, in the notice that went out, there's an email address that you can send your enrollment, your intent to enroll to me. There's a $25 participation fee that covers $15 for materials, and the labor putting it together is a labor of love. We have copies and notebook costs, though, and so in addition to that, there's a royalty that goes to the creator of the program, and it's the best deal you can ever imagine. For our members, congregational members, it's a tremendous deal, only $25. If someone would like to take the class from outside of the congregation, then we are asking that they make a donation in the amount of $95 to the congregation. So maybe they'll even join as members. If you're 95, might as well join. So we'll see if that would work, but certainly they are allowed and welcome to be on the format as well. So you can pass the word around on that. And at this time, I'd like to call upon Dan for any announcements that he may have. And we'll go right ahead.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for all attending today. We had a minyan, very nice. Rabbi, thank you for leading services. And Mark, thank you for leading the introductory service. Once again, thank you. As the rabbi mentioned, we're going to have the strategic planning session beginning. It will be on November 7th at 11 o'clock at the courtyard in Marriott up in Lake Mary. So 11 to 2. And let us know you're coming so we know how many to plan for. The next Haftarah will be on Friday evening, November 12th at the home of Sandy and Steve Weinstein in Lake Mary. More details to come out about that in the future as well. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you very much there, Dan. And I want to give thanks again to Tamara for helping us with the logistics of setting up our service here today with the microphones and teaching us how to do that and setting us up on the internet. We really, really appreciate her work there. Albert helped us last night. We thank him again. Tamara today. I want to thank Tom also, Tom Mayer, for his technical support and setting things up here, as well as Dan. And at the conclusion of our services, the usual is, you'll be asked to sort of pitch in a little bit and move the chairs back to creating the room as it was, leaving it in the condition that it was. Again, we express our gratitude to the Life Point Church for allowing us to partner with them here in these endeavors. And I think that's really all I needed to announce. At this point, I'm going to invite everyone to turn to page 412, and we'll do the first couple stanzas of Adon Olam, and then the last stanza beginning with Biyado. And we'll use the melody that you've heard before. Adon Olam asher malach b'terem kol yitzir nivra neitnatza v'chefzo kol azay melech shemo nikra Adon Olam v'yacharei kichlot hakol ולבדו ימלוך נורא אדון עולם והוא היה והוא הווה והוא יהיה בתפארה אדון עולם בידו הפקיד רוחי ותישן ואירא אדון עולם ועם רוחי קביעתי אדון לי ולא אירא אדון עולם אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא להתנשא וחפצו כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא אדון עולם. שבת שלום.